The wind came down the mountains in long, aching howls, brushing against the frosted windows of the Ashford estate. It was the kind of night where even the trees seemed to shiver, their bare branches scratching against the old glass like fingers begging to come inside. The fire had long burned out. Only the dull orange glow of embers remained, flickering weakly across the stone hearth. The rest of the house was swallowed in shadow, high ceilings, heavy curtains, the faint smell of cedar and old books, the kind of quiet that made you hear your own heartbeat. Upstairs, in a room filled with faded wallpaper and the soft hum of an old heater, Ellie Ashford, 8 years old, stirred in her bed. Her dreams had been soft at first, her mother's laughter echoing in the garden, the golden retriever they once had bounding through fields of wildflowers. But then the dream shifted, twisted, the flowers turning into snow, the laughter fading into the sound of footsteps. Elle's eyes snapped open. She sat up, small fingers clutching her blanket. For a moment she thought she'd imagined it. But then there it was again, a dull thud from downstairs. Then a faint metallic clang, like something being moved. "Dad," she whispered. No answer. The silence pressed down harder. The only sound now was the old grandfather clock in the hallway, ticking endlessly, like a heartbeat counting down. Ellie slipped her feet into fuzzy slippers and tiptoed toward the door. Her pink nightgown trailed behind her like a ghost. She hesitated at the threshold. She knew her father hated it when she wanted the house at night. But something deep inside her, a feeling she didn't quite understand, told her this wasn't a dream. At the top of the staircase sat Rex, the family's German shepherd. His coat, black and tan, shimmered faintly under the light of the hallway lamp. He lifted his head as Ellie appeared, one ear twitching, eyes locked toward the darkness below. "Rex," she whispered. The dog didn't move. He was utterly still, except for the low rumble building in his throat. It was a sound Ellie had never heard from him, for not the protective growl he made when strangers came by, but something deeper, ancient, a warning. Ellie froze halfway down the stairs. "Rex, what is it?" she whispered again, voice trembling. From below came a faint shuffle, then the sound of glass breaking, not loud, but sharp enough to slice through the silence. Rex's growl deepened. Downstairs, hidden by the dark, the back door creaked open. A gust of icy wind swept through the hallway, carrying with it the smell of wet leather and cigarette smoke, the smell of people who didn't belong here. Ellie's heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to call for her father, but her voice caught in her throat. "Dad," she tried again, barely a breath. Rex moved before she could think. He rose to his full height, muscles tensing beneath his thick fur, ears pointed forward. He stepped down one stair, then another, silent but purposeful. His tail was low, a soldier's stance. Ellie knew that stance. She had seen pictures of him beside her father in his old military photos, wearing a vest marked Canine Unit, U.S. Army. Her father always said Rex wasn't just a dog, he was a partner. And right now, that partner had sensed something dangerous. From the shadows of the kitchen came a whisper, then a muffled laugh. Ellie could make out shapes, 3 of them, men, moving like they owned the darkness. One carried a flashlight. The beams sliding across the marble counter, the silverware, the family portraits. "Holy hell," one of them muttered. "You see the size of this place?" Another voice replied, low and rough. "Grab what you can." Coleman said the safes in the study. Ellie's breath caught. They weren't supposed to be here. Nobody was supposed to be here. Rex stepped forward, the pads of his paws barely making a sound on the polished wood. His lips curled, showing teeth. A deep, rolling growl filled the space, the kind that made every hair on the back of your neck rise. "What the hell?" One of the men turned toward the stairs, flashlight beam catching Ellie in its glare. "There's someone there," he hissed, then, louder, with a grin that made her stomach twist. "Well, look what we've got here. Jackpot." Ellie froze, her tiny hands gripping the railing. For a split second, her mind went blank. The man's shadow stretched across the floor toward her, long and monstrous, but before he could take another step, Rex launched. The sound he made wasn't a bark, it was thunder, pure guttural fury. His body was a blur of motion, leaping over the last few steps and colliding with the first man in a violent crash. The flashlight flew, spinning wildly, beams flashing across chaos-broken glass, shouts, the deep echo of a table overturning. "Jesus Christ, get him off me!" the man screamed, falling backward. Ellie stumbled back up the stairs, heart pounding in her ears. "Dad!" she finally screamed. "Dad!" Downstairs, Rex's growls mixed with shouts and the clatter of falling chairs. Another man swung a metal bar. There was a yelp, a snarl, then a crash. Ellie covered her ears, tears spilling down her face. She didn't see her father, not yet. but from behind the closed study door came the faint sound of movement, the scrape of a chair, then a shout that made her chest flood with relief and terror all at once. "Ellie, stay upstairs." Rex barked, fierce, sharp, defiant. Then came the sound of a gunshot, a single, deafening crack that shattered the night. The house went still again, just the echo of the shot fading into the storm outside. And in that stillness, as snow fell heavy against the windows, Ellie clutched the banister and whispered through her tears, "Please don't let him be hurt." The gunshot tore through the night like a thunderclap. Ellie's scream echoed through the old house as the sound ricocheted off the marble floors and wooden beams. For a split second, everything was still, just the echo of the shot and the distant moan of the wind outside. Then came chaos. A chair scraped, a man cursed. The beam of the fallen flashlight spun wildly across the walls, painting the chaos in flashes of light and shadow. Ellie pressed herself against the railing, her tiny fingers white against the wood. Downstairs, Rex staggered for half a breath, then rose again. The bullet had grazed his shoulder, tearing through fur and flesh, but not deep enough to stop him. Blood darkened the tan of his coat, his eyes burned gold in the dim light. The man who fired, a bulky figure in a ski mask, stepped back, fumbling to reload. Son of a dismuts, still moving, Rex bared his teeth. His growl deepened into a roar. The second man, Mina, grabbed a crowbar from the kitchen counter. "Just kill it already. We don't need the dog." But before he could raise it, Rex lunged. The sound was sickening, a crunch of teeth against bone. The man screamed as Rex clamped down on his forearm, shaking violently. Blood sprayed across the white tile, spattering the stainless steel fridge and the pale cabinets. The flashlight beam caught the scene, pure fury in motion, a blur of fur and muscle and survival. "Get it off him. Shoot it." "Shoot I?" The man with the gun hesitated. Rex was too close to fast. If he fired again, he might hit his partner. Panic flickered in his eyes. Behind the mask, the third intruder, the one who'd muttered jackpot, turned his gaze toward the stairs. His grin returned, cold and sharp. "Forget the dog. Grab the girl." Ellie gasped, and backed up a step, but the stair creaked beneath her foot. The sound drew his eyes like a magnet. He raised his hand, gesturing to the others. "Keep it busy. I'll take the kid." But before he could move, a new voice thundered through the house. "Get away from her." It wasn't loud, it was commanding. It was the kind of voice that didn't ask twice. From the hallway door burst Caleb Ashford, barefoot, still in a gray t-shirt and military cargo pants. His eyes, once calm and distant, were now cold steel. In his hand, a pistol, the same one he'd hoped never to use again. He moved fast, instincts kicking in before thought. The moment his boots hit the floor, his gaze took in everything: the blood, the gun, the crowbar, his daughter frozen at the top of the stairs, and Rex, wounded but still fighting. Ellie, upstairs. Now, she obeyed, sobbing, retreating toward the hallway as he swung his weapon toward the gunman. "Drop it," Caleb shouted. The gunman hesitated, eyes darting toward his partner still screaming on the floor. That hesitation was all Rex needed. The shepherd released the bleeding arm and charged again. The man with the gun fired a wild, desperate shot. It hit Rex high on the shoulder, spinning him sideways, but even wounded, the dog didn't stop. He barreled into the man's legs, driving him into the kitchen island with a crash that shattered a glass bowl into 1,000 pieces. "Goddamn animal!" The man choked, trying to kick free. But Rex was no longer an animal, he was a soldier, fighting beside his handler once again. Caleb fired once. The bullet hit the gunman's thigh, sending him sprawling. The weapon clattered to the floor. The leader, Jackpot's grin gone now, lunged for the counter, grabbed a kitchen knife, and rushed Caleb. For a split second, Caleb saw the same desperate eyes he'd seen overseas, the eyes of a man who had nothing left to lose. Caleb sidestepped, grabbed the attacker's wrist, and twisted hard. The knife dropped. Caleb drove his elbow into the man's ribs and slammed him into the refrigerator. "You picked the wrong damn house," he growled. Behind them, Rex let out a deep, guttural snarl and lunged again, clamping down on the second man's pant leg as he tried to crawl toward the back door. The man shrieked and kicked, but Rex didn't let go. His body trembled with pain, his shoulder bleeding heavily, yet his jaws held firm. "Rex, down!" Caleb barked. Rex hesitated, panting hard, but obeyed, backing away just enough for Caleb to move. The two men, still conscious, scrambled toward the shattered back door. "Forget the safe, man, forget it," one of them yelled, dragging his partner by the arm. Caleb fired into the floor near their feet. The sound was deafening in the confined space. Next, once not a warning, they bolted, crashing through the broken door into the snow, disappearing into the storm. For a few seconds, silence, only the soft hum of the refrigerator motor and the faint crackle of the fire in the next room. Caleb lowered his gun. His hands were shaking, but his voice stayed even. "Ellie," he called, "quieter now. It's okay. You can come down." The little girl appeared on the stairs, trembling, eyes wide and wet. She hesitated halfway down, seeing Rex lying on his side. "Dad, he's bleeding." Caleb rushed to the dog, dropping to his knees beside him. The wound on Rex's shoulder was bad, deep, bleeding steadily, fur matted dark red. But he was breathing, chest rising and falling with ragged determination. "Easy, buddy, easy," Caleb whispered, pressing a hand over the wound to slow the bleeding. Rex's eyes flicked open, locking onto his handless face. Even now, even in pain, there was that same look, ready, waiting for the next command. Caleb felt his throat tighten. "You did good, soldier, you did real good." Sirens wailed in the distance. Neighbors must have heard the gunshots. Ellie knelt beside them, her small hands trembling as she touched Rex's paw. "Will he die, Dad?" Caleb looked at her, then at Rex. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady. "Not tonight," he said quietly. "Not while I'm still breathing." He looked toward the shattered door. Snow blowing in across the tile, blood streaked on the floor, the echo of violence still hanging in the air. He knew this wasn't random. They hadn't come for cash or jewelry. They'd come for something else. And whatever it was, they'd be back. Caleb took one last deep breath, eyes narrowing at the storm outside. Then he whispered to Rex, as if to himself, "Rest now, partner, the fight's not over yet." The shot cracked through the stillness of the house like thunder in the hollow of a mountain. Ellie screamed. The sound tore out of her small chest, high and raw, echoing through the marble hall. "Daddy." Rex staggered from the impact, his massive frame twisting as blood blossomed through his fur. The German shepherd let out a deep guttural growl, half pain, half fury, and pushed forward again. His claws scraped across the wooden floor as he lunged toward the man with the gun. The intruder cursed, stumbling backward, firing once more. The second shot missed, shattering a framed photograph on the wall, the one of the Ashfords smiling at a summer picnic long ago. Then, from the far end of the corridor, another sound rose, a heavy, deliberate rhythm. Footsteps. Caleb Ashford burst from his office, pistol already in hand. The years of hiding, of trying to bury what the war had made of him, vanished in an instant. His instincts took over, sharp and merciless. He saw the blood first. Rex's body hunched, trembling. Ellie frozen on the stairs, her little hands gripping the banister, eyes wide with horror. Then the intruder, a man in black, raising his weapon again. Caleb didn't think. He aimed and fired. The man dropped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Rex went, trying to move toward Caleb but collapsing instead. Ellie sobbed, running down the steps. Caleb caught her halfway, pulling her against his chest. "It's okay, baby. I'm here." His voice was steady, but his hands shook as he held her. "Don't look, Ellie. Don't look." She buried her face against him, trembling. But Caleb couldn't look away. The living room was a ruined, splintered wood, broken glass, streaks of blood across the once pristine white walls. The air smelled of gunpowder and smoke. One of the bodies twitched near the doorway. Another lay motionless by the kitchen counter. Only one man was missing, the one who'd run when the fight turned. The leader. Caleb's jaw tightened. He scanned the open door, snowflakes swirling in from the blizzard outside. Tire tracks glimmered faintly under the porch light. The bastard had escaped. Then a weak, broken sound pulled his attention back. Rex. The dog lay half-curled near the fireplace, his breath shallow, one paw dragging through a smear of red. His eyes, those loyal amber eyes, lifted toward Caleb and Ellie. He tried to stand again, to position himself between them and the threat that was already gone. "No, Rex," Caleb said softly, crouching beside him. "You did enough, buddy. You're safe now." Rex let out a low rumble, the kind of sound that carried both defiance and pain. He pressed his head against Caleb's hand, the warmth of his blood seeping through the man's fingers. Caleb felt something inside him break. He had seen soldiers die. He had seen friends fall in the dust of Kabul and Kandahar. But this was his home, his child, his last living piece of the world he'd fought to protect. And the price had come due again. Ellie knelt beside him, her small hand resting on Rex's back. "Is he gonna be okay?" she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. Caleb forced a smile he didn't feel. "He's strong, stronger than any of us." But when he pressed a towel to the wound, his hands came away. Doc. Outside. Faint sirens began to wail, a distant echo winding through the snowy hills. The neighbors had heard the shots. Or maybe someone had triggered an alarm. It wouldn't matter. Help was coming too late. Caleb lifted Rex's head gently, looking into those fading eyes. "You held the line," he whispered, voice trembling. Just like always, Rex's tail moved once, weakly. His breathing pinched, the firelight flickered across his muzzle, catching the gray hairs that had come with the years of loyalty and service. Then, slowly, his body went still. Ellie sobbed harder.
Pressing her face into Caleb's shoulder, he pulled her close, both of them shaking. Snow drifted through the broken window, landing on the dog's fur. The world outside was a blur of white and silence. Inside, time seemed to stop. For a long moment, Caleb couldn't move. He sat there amid the wreckage, his arm around his daughter, his other hand still resting on Rex's chest. The flames in the fireplace crackled softly, throwing long shadows across the walls. He thought of his wife, of her laughter echoing through this same hall, of her hands brushing the snow off his coat years ago.
She was gone, buried on this same hill, and now another grave would join hers. The sirens grew louder, flashing lights cutting through the trees beyond the porch. Caleb finally stood. Lifting Ellie into his arms, she clung to him, her small body trembling against his. "Daddy," she whispered through her tears, "why did they come here?" Caleb looked toward the shattered doorway, snow blowing across the threshold. Somewhere out there, the man who had led this was still alive, still hunting. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but we'll find out." He carried Ellie toward the front of the house as the police lights washed over the snow, red and blue flickering across the darkened walls. Behind them, the fire burned low, its glow reflecting off the blood-stained floor. Rex lay where he had fallen, head turned toward the stairs, as if still guarding the girl he loved. And outside, beyond the sirens and the cold, the forest whispered in the wind an omen that this was only the beginning. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, cold and sterile against the pale tile walls. Caleb sat hunched in a small waiting room, his jacket spattered with dried blood, his hands clasped so tightly they shook. The smell of antiseptic and fur clung to the air, sharp and unreal after the chaos of the night. Through the frosted glass of the surgery room, he could see movement shadows of the veterinary team bent over Rex's body, the glint of metal instruments under the light. Ellie sat beside him, small legs swinging off the edge of the plastic chair, her eyes fixed on the door. She clutched Rex's leather collar to her chest like a lifeline. "Daddy," she whispered, "he's gonna make it right." Caleb swallowed hard, his throat burned, dry from smoke and grief. "They're doing everything they can, sweetheart." The door opened with a soft hiss. A woman in a blood-stained lab coat stepped out, removing her gloves. Her face was lined with exhaustion, her eyes steady but kind. "You're Mr. Ashford?" He stood immediately. "Yes, how is he?" The veterinarian sighed. "That dog's a fighter, honestly. The fact that he made it here alive is a miracle. But the bullet lodged deep in the shoulder blade. It's close to the joint. Surgery won't be easy." Caleb's jaw clenched. "Then do it, whatever it takes. Don't worry about the cost." The doctor studied him for a moment, as if weighing the pain behind his words, then nodded. "We'll do our best." When she disappeared back into the room, Caleb exhaled shakily and sank back into his chair. His hands trembled in his lap, knuckles white. Ellie looked up at him. "Daddy, he saved us." Caleb's voice cracked. "Yeah, he always does." She slipped down from her seat and pressed her ear to the door's glass panel, whispering through it like a prayer. "You can do it, Rex. You're my hero." Her words twisted something deep inside Caleb's chest, and suddenly, without warning, the present began to blur. The hum of the machines, the sterile lights, the muffled voices all faded beneath the roar of another sound. A helicopter's blades, the stench of sand and gun oil, a desert sky, blinding white. 12 years earlier, Afghanistan. Caleb crouched behind a crumbling wall, the sun hammering down on his helmet. Bullets tore through the air, shredding dust and stone. His team was pinned down in a narrow alley of an abandoned village. No way forward, no way back. "Rex," he shouted over the gunfire. "Go." The shepherd shot out from cover like a streak of smoke and muscle. He darted across the open ground, weaving between wreckage, his vest catching the glint of sunlight. Ahead, an enemy fighter leveled his rifle. Caleb's heart lurched. Then Rex lunged. The man went down hard. The rifle clattered against the wall, a single shot echoing uselessly into the dirt. Rex didn't hesitate. He stayed on the ground, growling, pinning the attacker until Caleb reached them. "You crazy bastard," Caleb muttered, breathless, patting the dog's neck. "You just saved my life again." Rex looked up at him, panting, tail flicking once as if to say, "I know," but then another explosion, a blinding light, a pressure wave that threw them both to the ground. When Caleb opened his eyes, his ears rang and smoke filled the air. Rex was beside him, whining, pouring at his vest to wake him, even half conscious. Caleb had one thought: Don't let him die, not him. The sound of a monitor beep pulled him back to the present. The desert faded, replaced by the white glare of the veterinary lights. Caleb blinked hard, realizing he'd been gripping the edge of his seat so tight his nails dug into the plastic. His pulse still raced, as if he'd just stepped out of that same firefight. The door opened again. The vet's assistant stepped out this time. Face pale. He's still with us, but it's tough. He lost a lot of blood. Ellie clutched her father's hand. Can we see him? Not yet, the woman said softly, but he's fighting. Caleb closed his eyes, a whisper slipping from between his teeth. Of course he is. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time dissolved into the rhythm of the machines behind the glass. Each beep was a heartbeat Caleb measured his hope against. He thought of the desert again, their last day of deployment. He remembered walking beside Rex down the ramp of the cargo plane, the dog's paws clicking against the metal. A soldier had said, "Guess he's retired now, huh?" And Caleb had looked down at the shepherd at the way he scanned every shadow, every movement, always alert, always protecting. He doesn't retire, Caleb had replied. He just keeps watch somewhere else. The door opened one last time. The vet emerged, mask pulled down, sweat streaking her temples. He's stable, she said finally. We got the bullet out, Ellie gasped, a tear sliding down her cheek. He's okay, the woman nodded. He'll need rest, and time. But yes, he's a tough one. Ellie pressed the collar to her lips and whispered, I told you could do it. Caleb's knees nearly gave out. He pressed a hand over his face, the rush of relief hitting harder than any blow he'd ever taken. For the first time since the night began, he let himself breathe. When they were finally allowed into the recovery room, Rex lay on the metal table, wrapped in bandages, hooked to 4 lines. His eyes fluttered open at the sound of their footsteps. Caleb crouched beside him, touching his paw gently. You rest now, soldier. You did your part. Rex let out a faint sound, something between a sigh and a growl of acknowledgement. Ellie smiled through her tears. We're all here. Okay, you're not alone. Caleb looked at his daughter, then back at the dog, the only 2 beings who had truly kept him alive. Outside, dawn was breaking over Vermont. Snow still fell, soft and endless, catching the first light of morning. Inside, the warmth of the recovery room felt like the first fragile peace after a war that refused to end. The snow outside the Ashford estate hadn't melted for days. It lay heavy on the roof and trees, muffling every sound, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Inside, the rooms were colder than they should have been. Even with the fire burning, Caleb sat in the kitchen, staring at the empty coffee mug in his hands. He hadn't slept much since the night of the break-in. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of it again, the muzzle flashes. Ellie's screams, Rex's blood on the marble floor. Now there were police everywhere, detectives walking through the house, snapping photos, asking the same questions in different tones. The sound of boots on tile grated against his nerves. A detective named Ward leaned against the counter, arms crossed. He was younger than Caleb, but his tone carried the sharpness of authority. So, Mr. Ashford, Ward said, flipping open his notebook. You're saying you don't know what they were after? Caleb's jaw tightened. I told you, I don't. Ward raised a brow. Funny, because one of them, before he passed out, mentioned a safe. A very old one, hidden somewhere on the property. Caleb didn't move. His fingers curled around the coffee mug, knuckles white. There's no safe, he said evenly. Ward smirked. You sure about that, Captain? Because the way they went straight for the study, it looks like they knew exactly where to look, Captain. The word hit him like a bullet from the past. He hadn't heard anyone call him that since the war. Look, Caleb said, his voice low. My daughter could have been killed. My dog almost died protecting her. I don't care what they were after. Just find who sent them. Ward studied him for a long second, eyes narrowing slightly. We will, but if there's something you're not telling me, anything classified, anything connected to your time in the service, you'd better start talking now. Because whatever was in that safe, someone wanted it badly enough to spill blood for it. Caleb didn't answer. He couldn't. Upstairs, Ellie lay curled beneath her blanket, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The bandages around her hand itched, but she didn't move. Every creak in the house made her heart jump. Rex rested beside her bed, his front leg wrapped, chest still patched with gores. Every few minutes he'd lift his head, ears twitching, as if checking the shadows for danger. Ellie reached down, running her small fingers through the coarse fur between his ears. You don't have to stay awake all night, she whispered. You'll hurt. Rex's tail thumped once, slow and soft, before he laid his head back down. His breathing was steady now, but every exhale was a reminder he was still here. It's still guarding her. When Ellie finally drifted to sleep, The dreams came again, the shouting, the thunder of gunfire, the sound of Rex's pained cry. She woke with a start, tears streaming, her breath coming fast. Rex pushed his head up, whining quietly. Ellie wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her face into his fur. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice shook. "You're here. You're really here." Downstairs, Caleb stood in the study, the one the intruders had torn apart. The bookshelves were overturned, papers scattered, the old safe behind the false panel now exposed. Its door hung open, the lock twisted off by force. He stared at it for a long time. Inside was nothing but dust and a few scraps of old files. The real contents, what he'd hidden there years ago, were gone long before the attack. He'd burned them after his discharge. Or at least, he thought he had. He picked up one torn folder from the floor. The cover bore the faded stamp of the Department of Defense. His own name, Ashford, Caleb Jake, still visible beneath the smudge of soot. He ran a hand down his face. Whoever sent them knew exactly what they were looking for. When he turned, he caught his reflection in the cracked glass of a cabinet, eyes hollow, hair streaked with gray. He looked more like a ghost than a man, and in that reflection, he saw what he'd been trying to ignore. Ellie couldn't stay here, not while someone still wanted what he'd buried in his past. By morning, the detectives were gone. The house felt too big, too exposed. Ellie sat on the floor beside Rex, feeding him small pieces of cooked chicken from a hand he chewed slowly, careful, his movements stiff from the bandages. Caleb knelt beside her. "He'll walk again," he said quietly. Ellie nodded, not looking up. "He's still brave." Caleb smiled faintly. "He's always been brave." She looked at him then, eyes still red from crying. "Are the bad men gone, Daddy?" Caleb hesitated. "For now." She frowned. "You sound like you don't believe it." He touched her cheek gently. "I just think maybe we shouldn't stay here anymore. How would you feel about going somewhere else for a while?" "Where on?" "There's an old place I used to work. Out in the countryside, a training camp for service dogs. It's quiet there, safe." Ellie looked down at Rex. "Can he come?" Caleb chuckled softly. "He's the first one on the list." That night, as he packed their bags, Caleb found himself pausing at the window. The forest stretched endlessly beyond the estate, blanketed in white. Somewhere out there, one of the intruders was still free. He didn't know what they wanted or who sent them, but something told him this wasn't over. Behind him, Ellie's laughter broke the silence. She was showing Rex's new harness, whispering how he'd get to run again soon. Caleb watched them for a long moment, the little girl and the wounded dog, the two beings that tethered him to what was left of hope. Then he whispered to the empty room, as if to the ghosts of his past, "I'll keep them safe this time, no matter what it costs." Outside, the wind rose over the hills, carrying the faint sound of sirens fading into the distance. The war he thought he'd left behind was moving closer again, only this time it wore a different face. And as Rex lifted his head and growled softly toward the window, Caleb knew the real wounds weren't the ones bleeding. They were the ones buried deep, waiting to be reopened. The wind across the Ashwood Valley carried a softer sound. Now no sirens, no gunfire, only the hush of snow falling over the fields. The old training compound sat at the edge of the forest, surrounded by pine and silence. Once, it had echoed with barking, with the shouts of handlers and the pounding rhythm of drills. Now, only the ghosts of those days remained. Kayla parked the truck by the gate, the tires crunching through fresh snow. Ellie pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass. "It's big," she said in R. Caleb smiled faintly. "It used to be home for a lot of good dogs. Rex trained here before the war." At the sound of his name, Rex lifted his head from the back seat. The shepherd's body was still thin beneath the blanket, his front leg wrapped tight, but his eyes, those alert, amber eyes, were alive again. When Caleb opened the door, Rex climbed out slowly, testing the ground. His paws sank into the snow, and for a moment he just stood there, nose lifted, breathing in the air as if he recognized it. Ellie knelt beside him, rubbing his neck. "You remember this place, don't you?" Rex's tail wagged once, stiff but sure, inside the cabin. Warmth from the old stone fireplace filled the air. Caleb moved quietly, checking the locks, the windows, the perimeter. Old instincts, habits he couldn't unlearn guided every step. Ellie, sitting on the rug, was focused on Rex. She had a towel in one hand, dabbing carefully around the healing wound on his shoulder. "You're doing so good," she murmured, her voice soft, like the snow outside. Rex sat still, patient. His gaze never left her face. When she smiled, he leaned his head forward and pressed his muzzle gently against her arm. A silent thank you. Caleb watched from the doorway. There was something in that image, a fragile piece he hadn't thought possible anymore. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe. But it didn't last. That night, after Ellie went to bed, Caleb stood on the porch, cigarette burning low between his fingers. The wind had shifted. It carried a scent he didn't like: oil, maybe, or the faint trace of exhaust where no engine should be. He scanned the tree line. The pines were motionless, heavy with snow, their shadows long and dark. He told himself it was nothing, old paranoia, his mind, wound tight from too many years of watching the wrong horizon. Still, he stubbed out the cigarette and went back inside to check his rifle, just in case. A mile away, hidden among the trees, a man knelt in the snow. Cruz had been many things in his life: soldier, mercenary, survivor, but never someone who left a job unfinished. The cold bit into his hands as he raised the binoculars, focusing on the small cabin glowing faintly through the storm. Through the glass, he could see movement: a little girl playing with a dog, the same dog that had torn into his arm weeks ago. His teeth clenched at the memory. The scars still burned beneath his sleeve. Still alive, he muttered. Should have stayed dead. He adjusted the focus again. Then he saw Caleb Tolliver, still carrying himself like a soldier. Even at a distance, Cruz recognized that posture, the kind that didn't forget how to fight. "All right, Captain," he whispered, a grin cutting through the cold. Round 2. Morning came quiet and pale. Ellie woke early, bundled in her coat, and ran outside with Rex trotting slowly behind. The air smelled of pine and smoke. She picked up a stick and waved it at him. "Ready." Rex tilted his head, then almost reluctantly barked once. Ellie threw the stick. It didn't go far, just a few feet through the powder. Rex limped after it, picked it up carefully, and brought it back. "You did it," she said, laughing. Caleb stood on the porch, watching. He couldn't help the small smile tugging at his lips. But when he saw the dog limp back toward the girl, his chest tightened again. The wound would take weeks to fully heal, if it ever did. Still, Rex didn't complain. He never did. Later that afternoon, Ellie sat cross-legged by the fire, practicing the commands her father had taught her. "Sit." Rex sat. "Stay." He froze in place, eyes locked on her. "Good boy," she said, tossing him a small treat. "You remember everything." Caleb leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "You sound just like one of my recruits back in the day." Ellie giggled. "Maybe I'll be a trainer like you." "Maybe," he said. Though the thought brought both pride and fear, he didn't want her anywhere near the world that had made him who he was. That evening, as the snow thickened, Caleb went outside to gather wood. He noticed something strange near the tree-lined tracks in the snow. Not animal tracks, boots. He followed them a few steps, crouched down, and touched the imprint. Fresh, the edges still sharp, not yet softened by the wind. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He looked toward the forest, scanning for movement. Nothing but white, nothing but silence. But every instinct in him screamed otherwise. When he returned inside, he said nothing to Ellie. He didn't want her afraid. Instead, he quietly locked the door and drew the blinds. Rex lifted his head from the rug, ears twitching. His gaze followed Caleb's movements, alert and steady. "You smell it too, don't you?" Caleb whispered. Rex's tail gave a single thump. He rose, limping slightly, and went to sit near the window, guarding again. Always guarding. That night, sleep came in fragments. Caleb dreamed of the desert again, the heat, the sand, the weight of a rifle in his hands. But when he turned in the dream, it wasn't the war he saw. It was the cabin, snow instead of sand, and a shadow moving between the trees. He woke with a start, heart pounding. Somewhere outside a twig snapped. Rex was already standing, growling low, teeth bared toward the door. Caleb reached for the rifle. The fire crackled softly, painting the walls with trembling light. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering old tracks, hiding new ones. And just beyond the edge of the forest, Cruz watched, waiting for the right moment to strike. The storm came without warning. By dusk, wind howled through the valley, bending the pines like thin reeds. Snow whipped against the cabin windows in furious waves, turning the world outside into a white blur. Caleb had seen blizzards before, but this one felt different, angrier, heavier, like something was trying to erase the mountain itself. He stood by the window, the flashlight in one hand, rifle slung over his shoulder. Ellie sat on the floor, tracing patterns on Rex's fur. The dog lay close to the fire, his breathing steady but light, one ear twitching at every gust of wind. "When will it stop?" she asked. Caleb forced a calm smile. "Soon. Storms always pass." But even as he said it, a deeper instinct stirred inside him, an old, cold certainty that this storm wasn't just weather. By nightfall, the lights flickered once, then again, and then they died. The cabin fell into darkness, save for the orange glow of the fireplace. The silence afterward was sharp, suffocating. Ellie gasped. "Dad, it's okay," Caleb said quietly, moving toward the brake panel. Probably a line down. He never reached it. From outside, faint but distinct, came the crunch of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Caleb froze. Every muscle locked. Rex's head lifted instantly, ears pricking forward. Then came a low, rolling growl that vibrated in his chest. Caleb turned off the flashlight. "Ellie," he whispered, "go to the storage room. Now." "Dad." "What now?" She obeyed, clutching Rex's collar as she moved. But the dog resisted, eyes fixed on the door. Caleb crouched by the kitchen table, his hand closing around the old M9 he'd kept oiled and ready since the war. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat didn't. A shadow crossed the porch window, then the sound of a boot hitting the door. Once, twice. On the third hit, the door crashed inward. Snow blasted in, swirling under the flickering firelight. Two men entered, dark figures wrapped in snow gear. One carried a pistol, the other a crowbar. Cruz was the first to step inside, his scarred face glinting in the dim light. "Evening, Captain," he said, voice cutting through the wind. "Miss me?" Caleb didn't answer. He fired once. The shot tore through the wooden frame near Cruz's shoulder, forcing him back. The second man dove behind the couch. Returning fire splinters burst from the wall above Caleb's head. "Ellie, stay down," Caleb shouted, dropping low and rolling behind the kitchen counter. In the storage room, Ellie crouched beside Rex. She could hear the chaos, the gunfire, the shattering glass, the angry shouts mixing with the storm outside. Her small hands trembled as she held onto Rex's fur. Then, without warning, Rex stood. "Rex, no," she whispered, but he didn't listen. His eyes were sharp now, alert and burning with a kind of fierce clarity that ignored the pain in his bandaged leg. He pressed his nose to her cheek once, almost like goodbye, and slipped out the half-open door. Kayla reloaded behind the counter, every sense tuned to the dark. He caught movement near the hallway, a flash of metal, a shadow stepping closer. He waited, listened. A second later, Cruz's partner came into view. Caleb fired. The man dropped. Then, a different sound broke through the deep, savage bark of a shepherd rept. Caleb's head snapped up just in time to see the dog tear into the remaining intruder. Cruz stumbled back, shouting, as Rex hit him full force, teeth clamping down on his arm. "Get off me," Cruz roared, slamming the dog against the wall. Rex yelped but didn't let go. Caleb rushed forward, firing again. The bullet grazed Cruz's side. He cursed, kicking Rex hard, sending him sprawling across the floor. Ellie screamed from the hallway. Caleb turned just in time to see Cruz aim his weapon at her. "Don't." Cruz grinned through the blood. "Should have stayed hidden." "Captain," before he could fire, Rex lunged again, dragging himself across the floor, ignoring the blood seeping from his shoulder. He hit Cruz's leg, throwing off his aim. The shot went wild, embedding in the ceiling. Caleb didn't hesitate. He charged, tackling Cruz into the wall. The two men crashed through the table, fists flying, glass shattering. Years of buried rage and training poured out of Caleb like fire. "You came to the wrong damn house," he hissed, slamming Cruz's head against the floor. But Cruz, even wounded, was vicious. He shoved Caleb back, grabbing for the pistol that had fallen nearby. Both men lunged for it, snow swirling in through the broken door, the fire dying low, their breath coming out in harsh, ragged clouds. A single gunshot cracked the air. For a moment, everything froze. Then Cruz fell backward, eyes wide. The pistol slipped from his hand. Caleb stood over him, chest heaving. His knuckles were torn, his arm bleeding, but he didn't move until he was sure the man wouldn't get up again. Outside, thunder rolled through the storm like a growl from the mountains. When the silence finally came, it was almost unbearable. Caleb dropped the pistol and turned toward the living room. Ellie was kneeling beside Rex. The dog lay still, his fur matted with blood. "Rex," her voice broke. "He saved me, Daddy." Caleb dropped to his knees beside them, hands shaking as he checked the wound. A graze, bad, but not fatal. The dog's chest rose and fell, slow but steady. "He's gonna be okay," Caleb whispered, his voice rough. "You hear me, Bull? You're gonna be okay." Rex's eyes flooded open, focusing on Caleb for a heartbeat. His tail moved just once. Outside, the storm raged on, wind screaming through the trees, but inside the cabin, father, daughter, and dog stayed huddled together, breathing, alive, holding on to the fragile warmth of survival. When dawn finally came, the storm had passed. The world outside was buried under a white silence. The bodies were gone, Cruz's tracks leading into the woods, fading into the drifts. Caleb stood at the window, rifle still in hand, eyes scanning the endless snow. Somewhere out there, the storm's shadow still moved, but for now, inside that small cabin, they had one, and Rex, broken, scarred, but unyielding, rested at Ellie's feet, his head on her lap, keeping watch as the light slowly returned. Snow fell in thick, silent sheets, blanketing the mountain in white. The storm had eased, but the cold that followed was sharper and merciless. The world outside the cabin was hushed, as if holding its breath. Caleb Ashford could feel the air shift before he even saw him. A shadow moved among the trees, slow, deliberate, limping slightly but still dangerous. Cruz hadn't died in that cabin. He was coming back to finish the job. Caleb stepped outside, boots sinking into the fresh snow. The rifle in his hands felt heavier than it used to. Every muscle in his body ached from the night before. He could taste blood on his tongue, smell gunpowder still clinging to his jacket. Behind him, through the open door, Ellie knelt beside Rex. The dog lay still, bandages dark with fresh blood, chest rising. Ellie whispered, "Please stay, boy, please." Caleb turned his eyes from them and faced the woods. "Come on, Cruz," he muttered under his breath. "Let's end this." A flicker of motion in the tree line, then a gunshot split the stillness. The bullet missed Caleb's head by inches, carving a path through his hood. He dropped to one knee, rolling behind the snowmobile by the fence. Cruz emerged from the fog, face pale, eyes wild. His shoulder was bleeding through his coat, one side of his face bruised and swollen from the night before. But he was smiling, couldn't leave things unfinished. "Captain," Cruz rasped, "you took everything from me. Now I'll take what's left of you." Caleb exhaled slowly, eyes hard. "You've already tried." He fired once. Cruz dove behind a fallen tree. Snow burst upward in a white explosion. They circled each other through the storm, two ghosts on a field of ice. Every step, every breath, echoed like thunder in Caleb's ears. A second shot. Caleb's rifle clicked empty. Cruz laughed, low and cold. "That's all you got, soldier boy." Caleb tossed the rifle aside and stepped forward. "Unarmed? Come find out." Cruz charged, roaring. The two men collided with brutal force, fists, elbows, blood. Caleb ducked a punch, landed one across Cruz's jaw, felt bone give way. Cruz slammed a knee into his ribs. Caleb doubled over, gasping but refused to fall. Snow and mud stained their coats. Steam rose from their bodies as they grappled in the cold, both running on rage and exhaustion. "You think you're some kind of hero," Cruz spat, swinging again. "You're just another killer with a dog." Caleb caught his wrist mid-swing and twisted hard. The gun fell. He kicked it away, his breath visible in shop clouds. "You're right," Caleb said, voice low. "I am." And then he drove his fist into Cruz's throat. The mercenary choked, stumbled back, eyes wide. Caleb didn't stop. He tackled him into the snow, pinning him down, hands shaking with fury. "For my wife," Caleb growled. "For my daughter." He hit him once, twice. And for him. The third strike silenced Cruz forever. Caleb knelt there, breath ragged, snow falling softly on both of them. Blood bloomed red against the white ground, fading as it mixed with the frost. When it was over, he stood unsteady, dazed, and turned toward the cabin. Inside, Ellie screamed, "Daddy!" Rexy's not. Caleb ran. His boots thundered against the wooden porch as he burst through the door. Rex lay in the center of the room, head on Elle's lap. His fur was streaked with crimson, his body trembling with every breath. Ellie's small hands were pressed against his chest, trying to stop the bleeding. "He jumped in front of me," she sobbed, "when Cruz shot. He saved me again." Caleb fell to his knees beside them, his voice breaking. No, stay with me, boy. Come on, Rex." Rex's eyes fluttered open. He looked at Caleb, then at Ellie, those deep amber eyes still full of loyalty, of love that had no words. "You're home," Caleb whispered. "You made it home." Rex's tail moved faintly once against the floor. His breathing slowed, then stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Only the wind outside dared move. Ellie cried softly into his fur. Caleb bowed his head, his hands trembling as it rested on Rex's still chest. In that moment, the soldier, the father, and the dog, everything he had been, seemed to collapse into the snow. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Caleb didn't know. When the first light of dawn touched the cabin windows, the storm had cleared completely. Outside, the world was white and clean again, as if the night had never happened. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, Rex's collar in his hand. The tag gleamed faintly in the morning light. Rex Canine Delta, hold the line. He stood there for a long time, the mountains stretching out in silence before him. Behind him, Ellie appeared, bundled in his coat. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes, so much like her mother's, held quiet strength. "Will he go to heaven, Daddy?" Caleb knelt, placing a hand on her shoulder. If anyone deserves it, it's him. Ellie looked at the snow where they'd buried Rex, a small wooden cross marking the spot. He was the bravest dog in the world. Caleb swallowed hard. He was my brother. The wind swept softly through the pines, carrying away the last echoes of battle, of blood and fear. Caleb wrapped his arm around Ellie as they stood together, watching the morning light spill across the ridge. The war was over. The soldier had lost much, but he still had something worth fighting for. As they turned to go back inside, Caleb whispered under his breath, "Rest easy, boy. We'll hold the line." The first light of morning broke over the snow-capped peaks of Vermont, washing the horizon in muted gold. The world seemed calmer now, as if the storm had taken with it all the chaos and fury of the night before. But inside the military veterinary hospital on the edge of Burlington, silence carried a different weight, one of waiting, fear, and fragile hope. Caleb sat in the hallway outside the operating room, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped tight. His clothes were still stained with blood and dirt, dried in dark streaks across his sleeves. His wedding ring was cold against his skin. Through the window in the steel door, he could see shapes moving, surgical lights glinting off metal, shadows passing back and forth. Somewhere behind that door, Rex was fighting again, not in a battlefield this time, but against his own failing body. Ellie sat beside him, wrapped in a hospital blanket that swallowed her small frame. Her hair was tangled, cheeks pale, eyes red from crying, but she hadn't said a word since they'd arrived. She just kept holding the leather collar in her lap, her thumb brushing across the worn brass tag, Rex Canine. The door finally opened. A middle-aged veterinarian in a fatigued green jacket stepped out. Pulling down her mask, her face carried both exhaustion and relief. "He made it," she said softly. "It's a miracle he's still with us." Caleb closed his eyes, letting the air leave him in a shuddering breath. Can't he walk?" The vet hesitated. "He's lost part of the use in his left shoulder. The bullet fractured bone and damaged some nerves, but he's breathing on his own now. He's stable. He's alive." Ellie's voice cracked as she whispered, "Can I see him?" The vet smiled gently. "Yes, sweetie, just for a few minutes. He'll need a lot of rest." Inside the recovery room, the light was soft and sterile. Machines hummed quietly beside the bed where Rex lay, his thick fur shaved around the wounds, a dozen stitches mapping his body like war scars. His chest rose and fell slowly beneath the thin blanket. Ellie climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed, her tiny hand resting on his paw. "Hey, buddy," she whispered. "You scared us." Rex stirred, his ears twitched, and one golden brown eye opened halfway. When he saw her, his tail moved just once, faintly tapping against the metal frame. That single motion broke Caleb. He stepped closer, his voice unsteady. "You did it, soldier. You made it through." Rex blinked, and Caleb could almost feel the echo of all the years they'd shared the desert heat of Afghanistan. The nights on patrol, the sound of gunfire and orders barked in the dark. There had been a time when Caleb thought war had taken everything from him. But looking at Rex now, he realized something else. War had given him this brother, this living reminder that loyalty could outlast the worst of men. He turned to the doctor, voice quiet but firm. "Do whatever you need to keep him comfortable. No more fighting, no more pain. He's done enough." The doctor nodded. "We'll keep him here for observation a few days. After that he'll need care, therapy, but he should still have good years ahead." Caleb looked back at Rex, his throat tight. "He's earned every one of them." Later, when the nurses left them alone, Ellie leaned her head on Rex's side and closed her eyes. The steady rhythm of his breathing filled the room, soft and reassuring, the heartbeat of home. Caleb sat nearby, staring out the window. The sun had climbed higher now, glinting off the snow-covered hills. A new day, a quieter one. He thought about the words Cruz had spat at him, "You're just another killer with a dog." But looking at Rex and Ellie together, Caleb understood how wrong that was. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was the proof that even in the darkest corners of war, goodness could survive, compassion could fight back, and loyalty, real loyalty, wasn't trained. It was born in the moments when life demanded everything you had left to give. Caleb whispered, mostly to himself, "You're the best of us, old boy." Ellie lifted her head, her small voice trembling with warmth. "He's still my hero." Caleb smiled faintly. "Mine too." Rex let out a low, contented sound, almost a sigh, and his eyes closed again. For the first time in days, he looked at peace. When the doctor returned to check his vitals, Caleb stood and shook her hand. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." She smiled softly. "You're a lucky man, Mr. Ashford. Not many dogs would have survived what he did." Caleb looked at Rex, then back to her. "He's always been more than a dog." As the doctor left, Ellie climbed down from the bed and took her father's hand. Together they stood in the doorway, watching Rex sleep. The machine beside him beeped softly, each tone steady, alive, a fragile promise that the worst was finally behind them. Caleb felt something stirred deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, not since before the war, before he lost his wife, Hope. He bent down to Ellie's level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You know what, kiddo?" he said quietly. "I think he saved more than just our lives tonight." Ellie looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Caleb smiled, eyes glistening. "He reminded me what it means to fight for something good, something pure." He turned back toward Rex, his voice lowering. "You did your part, buddy. From here on out it's my turn." Outside, the storm clouds were gone. The sky stretched wide and blue above the mountains, sunlight scattering across the frozen peaks. The world was still, but not empty. It felt alive again. In that quiet dawn, Caleb knew one truth with absolute certainty. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Some just walk beside you, tail wagging, asking for nothing more than to stay by your side. And as the morning light spilled into the room, warming the walls of the little hospital, Rex's tail moved again, just once, like a heartbeat returning home. Spring came softly to the mountains. The last remnants of snow melted into silver threads that ran down the hillside, weaving through pine roots and thawed soil. The cabin stood quiet, wrapped in the smell of damp wood and the promise of new beginnings. For the first time in months, the air carried no scent of blood, no echo of gunfire, only the steady rhythm of life returning. Ellie knelt in the garden patch near the porch, her small hands buried in the earth. Beside her, Rex moved slowly, his gait uneven but determined. The bandage around his shoulder was gone now, replaced by a thin scar and a proud limp that spoke of survival rather than defeat. Every few steps, he paused, sniffed the ground, then turned to check on her, as if still guarding her from ghosts that might never truly leave. "You're doing it wrong," Ellie teased, tossing a handful of soil toward him. Rex wagged his tail, low and slow, eyes bright beneath the morning sun. Caleb watched from the porch, a mug of coffee in hand, steam curling like breath in cold air. His hair was grayer now, his movements slower, but his eyes carried a peace that hadn't been there in years. The man who once lived only by instinct, by survival, now allowed himself the fragile luxury of quiet. He stepped down the porch and walked toward the garden, boots crunching softly on the thawing ground. In his other hand, he carried something, a small stone plaque, rough around the edges, carved by his own knife. He crouched near the edge of the yard, by a patch of untouched earth where the pine needles still lay thick and brown. Ellie looked up. "What's that, Dad?" Caleb brushed the dirt away and placed the plank into the ground. The carved letters caught the light as the clouds shifted here. "Loyalty never dies." Ellie fell silent. Even Rex stopped moving, head tilted as if he understood the weight of those words. Caleb pressed his palm against the stone, his jaw tightening, not from grief but from a deep, wordless gratitude. That small patch of earth wasn't a grave. It was a promise, a reminder of every night he'd thought they wouldn't make it, and every dawn that proved they still could. He looked at Rex, who limped over and sat beside the stone, tail brushing against its boots. Caleb knelt, resting a hand on the dog's head. The fur was coarse, scarred, and perfect. "You kept her safe," he murmured, "kept me alive. You did more than your share." Partner Rex leaned into his touch, a low rumble in his chest, half a growl, half a sigh. Ellie came to stand beside them, wiping her hands on her jeans. "He's still a hero," she said proudly. Caleb smiled. "Always will be." Later that afternoon, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of pine, resin, and gasoline from the old barn. Caleb stood beside a weathered military truck, fastening a harness onto Rex's chest. The insignia stitched into the vest read, "Military Veterinary Rescue Unit." Ellie appeared at the doorway, arms crossed, pretending not to pout. "So you're going back to work again?" He looked at her gently. "Not the kind of work you think." She frowned. "You're still going to dangerous places." Caleb knelt to a level. "Sometimes, yeah. But not to fight. To save." She studied him, then looked at Rex, who stood tall despite his limp, ears perked, eyes full of purpose. Finally, she nodded. "Can I come when I'm older?" Caleb chuckled softly. "You'll probably end up running the whole unit." Ellie smiled, hugging Rex tight around the neck. "Take care of him, okay?" she whispered. Rex licked her cheek once, solemn and slow, before turning toward the truck. His breath steamed in the cool air, his tail swaying like a flag in the wind. Caleb watched, heart heavy yet light, like a soldier who'd finally found the battle worth staying for. As the sun began to set, he stood at the edge of the property, The mountain peaks burning gold. The cabin behind him glowed in the fading light, Ellie's laughter drifting through an open window. Rex sat at his side, gaze fixed on the horizon. Caleb spoke softly, almost to himself. You kept your vow, Rex. You guarded her. You guarded me. You never quit, even when everything else did. He took a breath, the kind that fills the lungs with memory. Now it's my turn. Rex turned his head, amber eyes meeting his. The world seemed to still around them, the whisper of trees, the echo of distant birds, the steady heartbeat of life carrying on. Caleb reached down and rested his hand on the dog's back. From now on, he said, voice steady, we keep watch, not because we have to, because we choose to. The wind swept across the field, rustling the plaque in the garden, scattering the last traces of winter snow. And as the first stars began to appear over the ridge, a man and his dog stood side by side, guardians of a promise, keepers of a bond that outlasted war, loss, and time itself.